Welcome to The Virtual Shift, a show looking at the seismic changes happening in healthcare with virtual care at the epicenter. Join me and my guests as we look at key cultural and policy shifts impacting how providers, payers, and patients connect, as well as how care is being reimagined both for today and the future. Hello, and thanks for tuning in today. I'm your host, Tom Foley. You can learn more about this show by visiting the program on healthcarenowradio.com, and be sure to follow me on LinkedIn, Twitter at FoleyTom, and the hashtag The Virtual Shift. Today we have a very special guest on, Paul Wilder, Executive Director of the CommonWell Health Alliance. Paul, welcome to the program.
Oh, pleasure to be here. Thanks for having me.
Awesome, Paul. So, Paul, we know each other way back. I reached out to you to participate in this program because of the recent announcement by the Department of Health and Human Services, ultimately identifying CommonWell as one of the initial 6 to participate in the ONC's Trusted Exchange Framework and Common Agreements to be a QHIN. So congratulations on that effort. Well, let's start first talking about CommonWell. It was interesting to read. CommonWell Health Alliance exchanges some 30 million documents weekly and serves more than 34,000 healthcare organizations caring for 200 million people. That is a hell of a reach. When we talk about not having interoperability in the United States, that's quite a common feat for what CommonWell is doing. Thoughts?
Yeah, we are not small. So CommonWell was founded March 2013, so just approaching our 10-year anniversary in a couple weeks, which is pretty amazing. And it's like almost an offense defense, right? So if you go back then, there was meaningful use going on. There was a regulatory push towards EHR adoption and defining what an EHR is. And around the edge, there was an interop discussion happening. And the defense part, it's not to hide what industry does. It was, hey, we think we can solve this problem ahead of regulation, potentially not solving it the right way. And our customers are demanding it. That's the kind of the offense thing. So let's get together. And interestingly enough, it was a bunch of vendors kind of came to that conclusion, all having conversations together that said, you know, our customers do want this. We do have a gap and we can build this right. And we do think it's not a single vendor solution, right? There is an idea amongst competitors that, of course, you want to sell your product to every potential customer. But interop is a sport where you have to recognize you're not going to win every customer, that you still need to connect to other stuff for the good of the entire industry, not just the HIT, the health information technology industry, but the healthcare industry, the providers, the payers, the people, the humans, the public health, patients, whatever, it all has to come together. It really shouldn't be a single vendor solution. So they came together and said, let's build interop in our products and have an edge that we can connect to that allows us to interoperate. And the closest equivalent I'll give, and I'll try and cut the story from getting too long, is Bluetooth, right? So you have these alliance members of the Bluetooth Alliance that establish a specification for how all these devices should connect to each other while they directly compete, right? So Samsung's got earbuds and earphones, and so does Apple, and so does Microsoft. And they're all members of this trade alliance to solve an edge problem of how do we make the specification that allows these devices to connect while we compete on form, function, and features of the devices themselves. And that's what we have here. We have a bunch of aggressive competitors in the room together agreeing that the edge of this needs to be common. That's CommonWell. And we then serve up, the difference between Bluetooth and us is we then serve up a hub in the center that maintains that specification and allows them to connect, knowing that they only have to connect to one thing. They connect to the hub. So we talk about 34,000, clinical sites. It's really probably about 25 to 28,000 legal entities, right? Because some are multiple site entities under IDNs and the like. But we only have, say, 30 some odd connections to us, right? It fans out. So a lot of the work in CommonWell is done by the members doing interop on their side. And we're helping with that final edge of locating data across entities, some of their own, some of their competitors, and getting data to flow. And that's how you get the scale.
Interesting. So as we talked, I was on the original Allscripts team when CommonWell was founded. And that was at a HIMSS conference that this announcement was made. And the founding members stated 3 primary points of beliefs. 1, the patient's data should be available to patients and providers regardless of where or when care occurs. 2, provider should be able to access their data via a native health information technology product. And 3, this ability should be embedded within the system at a reasonable cost to the provider, leveraging existing standards to the greatest extent possible. Where do you think we are relative to those beliefs?
Yeah, I mean, the good news is that the forward thinking from 2013 applies today. Those general principles, if you go back to what I answered about kind of where we are and what CommonWell is, it still sticks, right? The general idea is most of interop is in front of your screen, right? Is what you see in front of you. And that's going to be your primary productivity tools for clinical and administrative stuff in healthcare, which is your electronic health record. So a lot of the interop is really there. What we are providing is the edge, right? So you take all these Cerner sites and Meditech and ClinicalWorks, Athena, go down the list of the large scale and smaller EHRs we have here. They can't connect to each other without some sort of mutual understanding of how that's going to work, both technically and from a policy perspective. So not only is it our technical specification, but there's a trust framework embedded in that I will connect my providers and you will help your providers get connected. And we agree to the principles of how that policy set works. I shall respond to data as long as you respond to data. The reciprocity is there. And so it's really been the same. The only thing that we didn't do out of the gate, the first principle was for providers and patients. And the patients parts came in 2016, where we opened up our specification for consumer applications to plug into the network to collect data on behalf of an individual patient. So that's a bit lagging compared to where we are on the provider side. Most of that 30 million documents a week, and I say most, is probably 99 point something, is provider to provider exchange. Other versions and use cases of patient access, payment operations are small in comparison, a fraction of a percent, but they're happening. We've had it up for a while, both of those, and things are moving along. So I don't think our principles have changed. I think the only difference that you're seeing is in the first one, it's providers and patients, and now you can add payers, and soon you'll add public health as well. Keep adding more Ps until we get them all done.
You know as well as I do, the interoperability challenge in the U.S. has been a topic of conversation for a long time. And because there doesn't seem to be that end game in place, right? And I always used to say, as you know, I was involved with the HISP and very much involved with direct messaging and the whole challenge of exchanging data and all these different EHRs playing nice in the sandbox and actually being, I would say, for the first time when we did the direct messaging as part of Meaningful Use 2, it was that we got onto a common definition of what a medical record was. Even though there were standards in the Meaningful Use, not everybody had the same interpretation. But interoperability in it itself is still flawed in the context of how an EHR would match a record, right? It's based on a probabilistic matching algorithm, not a deterministic matching algorithm. So there's still a lot of flaws in that ecosystem in the context of, if I do get data, how confident am I it is all of my record versus an improper matching of records that originated at the source?
Yeah, so let me talk a little bit on that, because I think this is an important part of our trust framework that a lot of people don't realize is part and parcel to the core. So CommonWell, first of all, I didn't mention, is a 501c6, which is a tax-exempt nonprofit called a trade association. And one thing you have to think about trade associations is our job is never to compete with the market. We're kind of almost like a commercial version of a public good, right? There's some gap that the market can't serve for whatever reason that we believe collectively the market and the industry participants can solve together, but can't individually. And you hit the nail on the head, right? So if you understand how health information exchanges work, and we don't consider ourselves one, and I can explain why. One of the core technologies is an MPI, a master patient index, and they do work on a probabilistic algorithm. And then they'll have staff at the HIE itself that work on the cues, the things that don't match perfectly. And usually it's a score. You take first name, last name, date of birth, all this stuff. You add up all these numbers and you come to a score of this patient and that patient are a 16.1 score being the same thing. It's like an arbitrary number. And you say, okay, 16.4 is the number that we consider it the same. And so it doesn't meet that threshold and it goes into a queue and it sits there forever, right? You have 20 staff at the HI just going through the queue. The unique thing of CommonWell, the thing that makes us unique is that function is distributed throughout every endpoint in CommonWell. Any endpoint in CommonWell can look into that queue and say, my patient is not being matched. Now, my patient doesn't have records outside. That doesn't make sense because I know there's a lot of records available in CommonWell and I know my patient has been to other locations, let me look at the near matches and let me adjudicate it, right? So I can talk to the patient who's in front of me and say, can you give me some of the cities you used to live in? And they say, I used to live in Evanston. What was the number of the street address on Main Street that you lived? 123 apartment C. This is you, right? So now on the screen in real time, every Alliance end user underneath one of our members. So you take an EHR vendor, which is a member. The members are generally industry participants. And then below them are providers, hospitals, and clinics. Any clinic can call up an API within their EHR and do that linking on their own. And so it makes it easier if you're really interested in data to go find it versus relying on a technology in a Borg that you have no access to and have to hope it's doing its job well. That is the Alliance's difference and why it's not a common off-the-shelf MPI. Right? We could take a common off-the-shelf MPI at the core, but the APIs around it that allow the trust framework not just to exchange data, but to exchange patient matching criteria and patient matching adjudication is a big, big leap. Is it done? No. I think the main thing that I say is that we have work to do on 35,000 sites here, 50,000, you add 15,000 more when you go over to care quality. Sounds like a lot, but the reality is we're pretty top heavy. And we admit this. We have, 7 of the top 10 EHR companies in the country are on CommonWell. 3 of the others are in care quality. And when you do 80-20 rules, those top 10 account for probably 90% of the EHR installs in the country. Let's take that back. Not the EHR installs, but the EHR data. They tend to be larger practices, but there are a lot of smaller systems that are on homegrown EHRs or EHRs that aren't part of CommonWell right now that are still left out there. If you look up ambulatory data, if you did a Google, Bing, whatever your favorite search engine is, and looked up the number of ambulatory sites in the country, you probably find a number between 205 and 225,000 sites. So if we have 50,000 represented, and there's probably 6,000 hospitals, and there's a bunch of SNFs and other, skilled nursing and other facilities, we're still missing a lot of endpoints. And so the problem with interop, one of the key problems, is it's hard to rely on data if you don't know how many holes there are in it. So we need to finish the job. Right now, it's almost like it's secondary advisory data. It's not to be relied upon because we're missing 75% of the endpoints. And the most critical piece of information could be hiding in one of those. So you still have to go through your H&P. You still have to go through all your administrative flows to get as much data you can out of the person because you're not sure if the Borg is really giving you all that. We need to finish the job. That's kind of where we moved to TEFCA, saying, how do we finish this job and how do we move this forward?
Yeah, and that's a great transition, and I didn't pay anything to do it either. So so I wanted to kind of move over to the HHS's recognition of you being a participant as a QHIN. So tell us a little bit more about what this effort is in the context of what you're already doing, and what is a QHIN in context of TEFCA?
Yeah, so first of all, just to get rid of some acronym soup, QHIN is Qualified Health Information Network, and TEFCA, you already said, was a Trusted Exchange Framework and Common Agreement. So TEFCA, first you break that apart, is TEF, is the Trusted Exchange Framework, and then there's an agreement that goes along. So the QHINs are advanced networks, something like a CommonWell and our peers, that would be, for lack of a better term, a supernode on a framework of connected supernodes. Right, so you imagine, telecom. So you have an AT&T supernode, you have a Verizon supernode, and they're all allowed to register phone numbers and connect. You don't get a T-Mobile phone and you can only call T-Mobile people, right? You can call anybody because they're all part of a framework that connects to stuff. There's more centralization, there's more government intervention and registrations, all that stuff. So it's a little bit different. That really industry is doing this with government as opposed to government with industry. It's just a little bit different. But the general idea is the same, is that you have these supernode networks that would be able to flow down terms of that common agreement. So the QHIN signs an agreement that every other QHIN, the same exact contract, which establishes a trust framework. And then that trust framework also links over to a technical specification of how we'll connect to each other. So we don't have to fight on the how. The how is defined. The how we do on the inside could be completely different, right? We could be, the outside has a specification. The inside we have to translate to the common spec, but it allows us to make this CommonWell concept and other frameworks that exist at a higher level, right? We're taking CommonWell from 35,000 sites and saying, pick a QHIN, right? You don't have to pick CommonWell. We would love you to. We think that we have our trust framework of the shared MPI, we think is a unique thing that makes TEFCA work even better, and we will be the biggest supernode on that network to start. and we'll probably maintain that for an extended period of time. But we welcome everybody to pick the QN that fits you the best so that you're on the national framework so that every piece of data is discoverable to you. And every piece of data and vice versa is also discoverable to everybody else. So, while the CommonWell mission of 2013 still applies, and we could have done this without TEFCA, just as we recognize a single vendor can't be the dominant EHR for everybody, we also understand that one network and one solution to convene them all is probably not going to work either. And so we're excited to have other QHINs that are going to do the same work we're doing with their kinds of constituents, which could be different. They may not be EHRs, they could be consumer applications, it could be payers, it could be a single vendor for all their customers. And we all could come together at the center to make true nationwide, no stone unturned interop work. And then we could work on the rest of the challenges of interop, right? You have to lay the pipes to be able to talk about data quality and normalization, all the stuff we want to do next.
Well, one of the things that comes out in TEFCA, and it's only because of my own background, as you know, I've been on stage talking about patient identity, which is the reason why I brought up that probabilistic matching algorithm earlier. TEFCA requires that all patients be identified and authenticated. And to me, this is kind of the tipping point or the transition point of moving from that probabilistic matching to deterministic matching, because once I've identified and authenticated that patient, I can now create a unique identifier for that patient. It is this person as opposed to another Tom Foley. But the point is that to me, it starts to change the dynamics in the confidence of the data and ultimately becomes a common necessity to ultimately achieve wellness. Your thoughts on that?
Well, first of all, CommonWell not only doesn't have an issue with a national identifier, and strongly encourage a national identifier, right? The uniqueness of our NPI management of distributing it throughout our trust framework is great, but we have no issue with there being, a thing that makes that easier, right? We are spending a fair amount of time, effort, and, convening time on how to operate that thing in a trust framework, right? It would be easier if there was a national identifier. What would then happen is we'd look down to what's called record location. Even having a national identifier doesn't help with the next part of the trust framework and uniqueness, which is where is the data? Because I can have a national identifier. Let's say I use my driver's license everywhere as an identifier, which is a pretty strong ID, right? My New Jersey number is unique. And so security number we know is not completely unique, but close. But let's say every provider I went to, they actually typed in my 15-digit New Jersey driver's license number. That would be a pretty strong identifier that wouldn't even need a national ID. Now, when I move, there'd be a problem, right? When I go to Illinois and I get an Illinois license, I'd have to somehow link my New Jersey ID and my Illinois ID and kind of keep perpetuating that until all my stuff's linked again. And that could take some time. But even if I did that, and then let's say I went to every provider I saw was in New Jersey, I still don't know which New Jersey providers I went to unless I asked them all. So what record location does is it allows them to broadcast, or I guess really unicast directly to CommonWell, I have this Paul Wilder. So that when I show up at another practice and they say, find me data for Paul Wilder, we don't have to make a phone call to every provider in New Jersey or a digital phone call. We just make it to CommonWell. And CommonWell says, here are the 5 sites I already know Paul Wilder exists at. So there's this perception that a national identifier is a nirvana. It is on the patient security and ability to say this person is really who they say they are across entities. It doesn't necessarily help us find the entities unless we're going to stand up a centralized record location system at a national level. And I think TEFCA has a record location concept in it where every QHIN is responsible for record location within their world. That with a national identifier is powerful, right? Because then all I have to do is use that national identifier across QHINs and say, here's this ID, this national ID. Where do you have people that have this ID? And so there's 6 QHINs right now that are approved to continue. If it stayed there, I only have to make five questions instead of 210,000 questions. I say 5. Hey, where do you know this person has? I get 5 responses back, and I already have an index of my stuff. So it'd be pretty efficient. So I strongly encourage us to figure that out. But we know that's embroiled in.
I'll move off this point because there's other things we want to talk about. But I will say that, as part of Meaningful Use Stage 2, direct messaging had to be incorporated. And as part of exchanging patient data, there was a patient identification and authentication requirement in that specification. The point there being is This is where the EHRs, in my view, dropped the ball in creating that unique identifier, but they stuck with the probabilistic matching algorithm and perpetuated a problem. That's just my own. I know that comes across a bit negative, but it's not as if the EHRs have been the most innovative in the world. So at the end of the day, trust in the data is paramount. And I do agree with you that this data needs to start to flow as a ubiquitous tool. So at CVS, if I go to CVS Minute Clinic, or if I go to an urgent care telehealth appointment, right, I should be able to ping that national database, as opposed to not knowing anything about this patient, but he's telling me he or she's got a sore throat. I'm just going to prescribe antibiotics, right? But if I knew that they were at the other Walgreens or at Walmart, I could better understand who this patient is and what their health conditions are. So wellness is part of the solution, and not a continued challenge, right?
That's absolutely correct.
Yeah. So this is where I'm actually very anxious, and I'm not on meds for this, but I'm very anxious to see the value of the payers starting to come into the equation. Because my view is that not one health system, therefore not one EHR, knows everything about me. As you know, I come from New Jersey, so I can go to New York, New Jersey, Philadelphia for healthcare, right? It's all within an hour's ride, a train ride,
Yep.
right? So the point there being is the only person that really knows about me is the payer. And for them to be a participant in this process, I think is awesome. Thoughts on that?
Well, first of all, your current payer knows about your current stuff, but payers change too, right? And the less and less that there's loyalty between commerce and the people that work for them, and the more competition there is for payers. Like, you could stay at the same company and they can change payers based on changing from Aetna having a better deal than United versus the Blue or whatever it is. So, you don't think about your payer strategy when you're doing your cafeteria plan selection every year for your insurance in terms of your data liquidity on the other side. Like, that's not a normal thing to think about. You're not supposed to. Like, you're just a normal human being. So you may not realize, yes, that you fractured your own record even on the payer side. So you need the payers to do the same thing that providers are doing, to share data across each other. What you're getting at is the concept of filling health gaps, right? You don't know the gaps unless you have other tools to figure out where the gaps are. And you can use things like, medication data to give an insight into that, right? If you have a link to SureScripts or Doctor First or whatever it is, and you get a medication history, the medication history is a history that helps inform likely clinical things, right? It's not perfect, but yeah, if someone's got a prescription for insulin, probably diabetic, or at least you can ask them why they're taking insulin and confirm that they're diabetic without ever seeing a piece of clinical data saying so. And so payers may not have all your clinical data, but they know the claims and procedures that went along with that. And those procedures so they all help with filling the gap. And I don't think we can rely on the payer because of the changing way, change employers, you change payers, but they should participate in the same framework so that gap doesn't become a problem too. You need both. You need medication data, you need provider clinical data, you need claims and location data to really paint a full picture of your health.
Yeah. No, but payers are starting to step in front of their own provider network and provide telehealth services directly, and provide remote patient monitoring and chronic care management services. So the data, them being a health provider versus an insurer, that dynamic has to play into the overall schema. So we only have about a minute left. So tell us a little bit about what's going to happen over the next year with CommonWell and standing up to QN, and what we should expect in 2024.
Yeah, the TEFCA build is going to take a little bit of time. It's not an overnight process. I'll be frank, though, the specification for TEFCA isn't that far different from things we're doing already. So, right, the good news is it's not a big leap technically. It's just that we are operating a network that moves 30 to 40 million records a week with 200 million people and 35,000 connected sites. So, we also have to maintain that thing working while we're building the small changes to our specification to make this work. So, we're expecting almost like a hacking exercise, right? The QNs have to come together to make sure that the spec actually works, what was defined under TEFCA, adjust as necessary, very similar to what we do at CommonWell, and then stand this thing up. And that's probably a 6 to 9 month process to get, 2 or 3 really working in earnest. And then it's convincing the providers to accept the terms and conditions of TEFCA. And care quality, which is a framework we connect to today, has a history here of how long that takes. And over there, it took a couple of years. So, it takes a little while to tell a provider, I have a brand new thing that's better than what you have now, and you should sign up. I think Dr. Blumenthal was the director of the ONC back in the day, right before Farzad. And he was famous to me. He mentioned something about HIT adoption and said, well, it took 70 some odd years for healthcare to adopt the stethoscope. So why do you think this is going to happen overnight? So, it's going to take a little bit of time, but I think this is like a 3-year turn where we go from what we're doing today to moving all the stuff over. And in the meantime, adding a lot more stuff at the same time, right? So we have to be careful. We're not just converting over to something. We're converting to have a better destination for everybody. And that's a multi-year effort. But the next year is going to be building that, really the next 6 to 9 months building it, and then starting to move things over and doing TEFCA in earnest.
Well, I'm really excited for CommonWell. It's exciting to see where it is today versus where it was when we started 10 years ago. To me, this is mission critical for a transformed health system. People may not see it that way, but my data and my access to my data to move towards wellness is absolutely critical.
I know we have to drop, but I just want to add one thing for your listeners, just so they're aware. While we talk of 6 QHINs being approved, we're actually approved to continue forward to get designated. So one thing that should add some comfort to TEFCA is every QHIN has not been tested yet as being able to go to production. They've just been tested so far on whether they have the history and experience to continue forward. We still have to pass connectivity testing and all that. So by the time the QHINs are designated, that's that 9-month range that I keep mentioning, we'll have gone through a lot to make sure that we have the security, privacy, technical, policy, contracts, everything in place to make this work at scale. And then we're all designated and we run. But this public-private partnership, it really is the commercial, the industry coming together with government to make sure that the framework of the future is something that can be relied upon and trusted across many stakeholders within healthcare, and as you mentioned, like adding it to payers as well. This is a big leap in that respect.
So we'll have to leave it there, Paul. Great conversation. Appreciate you taking the time to join us. I wish you nothing but success. Have a great day.
I appreciate it. Thank you, Tom.
I want to thank the show sponsors, HP. HP Engage Long Lifecycle Products provides the stability, safety, and security you need, plus flexibility and performance designed for today and tomorrow. As well, GenieMD, providing a modular, scalable, and customizable virtual care platform and clinical services to help providers extend care into the home, increasing access and quality while driving new revenue opportunities. If you missed part of today's episode, you can tune in at the same time, 11 a.m. or 7 p.m. Eastern, throughout the week, and be sure to check out the program page on healthcarenowradio.com. And remember, connect or follow me on LinkedIn, Twitter @FoleyTom, and follow the show's hashtag, The Virtual Shift. I'm Tom Foley. Until the next shift.